This war began as a dispute between Imperial Russia and the Ottoman Empire over the Crimean, but quickly pulled in other powers like Austria due to their alliance with Russia and then finally Sweden. In 1787, the Ottomans demanded that Russia evacuate the Crimea, which Russia took as a casus belli, and declared war on the Ottoman Empire on August 19, 1787. The Ottomans began with an invasion of southern Ukraine, which was defeated but found some success against Austrians in Serbia and Transylvania. This was short-lived as the Austrians repulsed the Ottomans in Croatia and then took Belgrade in a counterattack. Further Russian victories and a revolt in Greece led to a peace treaty on July 31, 1791. The Ottoman war goal of pushing Russia out of the Crimea failed and ended with the Ottomans giving some land in Bessarabia to Russia. Taking advantage of the situation, Sweden declared war on Russia in 1788 in an attempt to march on St. Petersburg and instigate a coup to depose Empress Catherine II. The attack stalled and the coup never materialized, causing the war to settle into a stalemate. With mounting costs and mounting pressure from England, Prussia, and the Dutch, Sweden offered terms to Russia. Catherine happily accepted so she could concentrate her efforts on the Ottoman War, and the war came to an end in 1790 with little change to their respective borders.
Well, welcome back, Axis Analysis players. This is NATO and the CIC, and this is the Russo-Ottoman War of 1787 and the Russo-Swedish War of 1788. This was a war that was started between the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire over more or less the Crimean Truvia region right here. And Russia had been encroaching into this territory and had kind of more or less claimed it / taken it over because Russia is basically looking for a warm water port to improve its economy, because if you look at the wider map, the only access Russia has to water is the Baltic Sea. And as you can imagine, this far north, most of its ports would freeze over in the winter and be more or less unusable. So Russia was, aside from just wanting to expand its empire, Russia was seeking access to a warm water port, and so it set its eyes on pushing down into Crimea and, wow, that sounds familiar, and Truvia to gain access to the Black Sea, and then from there the Mediterranean through Istanbul. Ottomans, obviously not liking this, resisted, and in 1787 the Ottomans more or less gave Russia an ultimatum, get the hell out or we'll make you get the hell out. And war was declared, and Austria, having a alliance with Russia, entered the war as well. About a year later, 1788, Sweden, who was government wasn't a fan of the Russian monarchy, tried to take advantage of Russia's forces being occupied in the south and declared war and marched on St. Petersburg in an attempt to cause a coup and overthrow the Russian monarchy. That, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side of the fence you're on, did not happen, and Sweden got dragged into the war for several years. And, well, we'll see how the outcome happens at the end of the war. But it's a little more limited conflict than the previous two scenarios, 7 Years' War and American Revolution. Not quite as big and not quite as long. It's only 10 turns. but that's the initial setup. Some special rules. The Russian and Swedish War is completely separate from the Ottoman War. Sweden cannot interfere with the Ottoman War, and vice versa. Ottomans cannot interfere with the Swedish War if they somehow were in a position to. They cannot lend lease to each other. Russia can lease to Austria. It can initially trace a sea route from the Baltic Sea all the way around to Austria. Once / if the Ottomans take their frigate to cut off that sea route, Russia can try to send it overland through the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But there is a risk involved in that, because at this point in time, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is falling apart. It's in utter chaos right now. The partition, the Great Partition, as it's known, is only a few years off. That's where the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth basically collapses, and the land is divvied up between Russia, Austria, and Sweden. That's only a couple years out. So if the sea route is blocked and Russia tries to lease through the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, there is a chance that it can get lost in the chaos. The Ottoman player will roll a d6 on a 1. It is intercepted. It's lost, taken by bandits, destroyed, whatever you want to call it. But other than that, Ottoman goals are to push into Ukraine, particularly Kiev, but Ukrainian territories. Russian goals is to prevent that and hold on to Kiev. Austria's goal is to push into the Balkans and take Serbia, Romania, a couple other places. And Sweden's goal is Tarnia and Viperi. Seems how this is the legacy game, as in you're all playing all these games as attached. Russia might just sacrifice this northern war, let Sweden win and concentrate on the Ottomans, because that's more important to win that. And any territory lost to Sweden, Russia can get back in the Napoleonic Wars. So playing the legacy game, it might be better for Russia to just let Sweden win this to concentrate on winning the Ottoman War, which is much more important. If you're playing this modular and as a standalone, then whatever you want to do. So we will get in the first couple turns, and I'll come back with an update. See you then. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO and the CIC, and we are in the fall of 1788. So the war has been going on for 1 year at this point. And the Ottomans pretty much made a preemptive attack and just invaded everywhere they could. Invaded into Kamenskaya, Munich, Kiev, Western Ukraine, and Austria. Pretty much to keep the front line out of Ottoman territory so their production isn't hurt. They also took their frigate, sailed it out to the middle of the Mediterranean to cut off the sea route from Lend-Lease. So that's forced Russia to send its lease overland through chaotic Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The first attempt made it through successfully, but the second one was destroyed somewhere in the chaos. So Ottoman move to cut off Lend-Lease is starting to pay off. But then Russia counterattacked and drove the Ottomans out of Kiev. But the Ottomans have this army sitting here in Taruvia to keep the pressure on. Sweden is massing its forces to attack because they joined the war. They sort of joined the war this turn. It's a separate war from the Ottomans, but Sweden declares war on Russia this turn, so they'll be entering it. So Russia's going to be fighting a two-front war. Russia took its frigate down to the Baltics and is heading down to the Mediterranean to try to reopen the sea route for Lend-Lease. Now, one thing I forgot to mention on the first part of this about the Cossacks, the elite cavalry. They don't need a factory to produce out of and don't count towards factory limits, but they do have to come out of the Tsaritsyn territory right here. After that, they can go wherever. But so that's been the war so far. We'll come back later with another update and see how the war's going. See you then. Welcome back Axis and Allies players. This is NATO on the CIC, and we're at the spring of the 1791 turn. So far, Russia has pushed the front line into the Ottoman territories pretty much along most of the Black Sea coast. They pushed the Ottomans out of what the hell is that called? Kolonskaya and Munich, and pushed the front line all the way back into Caucasia and Taruvia. The only place they haven't pushed the Ottomans back in is western Ukraine. Austria has pushed the Ottomans out of Austria and have actually pushed into Serbia. And the Ottomans are struggling at the moment. It's more or less been on a 2 versus 1 war, trying to fight the Russians and the Austrians at the same time. They're holding, if barely. And as of this turn, they've lost their only support in Sweden's. Sweden is out of the war, so that has kept Russia distracted somewhat with siphoning off some Russian forces to fight Sweden, but that's now gone, so 100% of all of Russia's energy and production is going to be focused on the Ottomans now. And they're barely holding as is, but thankfully there's only 3 turns left, so if the Ottomans going to hold on for 3 more turns, they might be able to squeeze out a draw. Because right now it's sitting at 1-0 in the Russians' favor. Sweden, they took Murmansk, took Tornia, but they could not take Vipery. So Murmansk isn't a victory point, they just took it for production. But there are 2 points, Tornia and Vipery. They took 1, so the Russo-Swedish War has ended in a draw. Sweden has 1 point, Russia has 1 point. That's more or less how it ended historically. I think Sweden, in the negotiations, Elizabeth II, she did give up some territory in Tornio and Vipery, basically to appease Sweden, because Catherine's focus was the Ottomans. She saw that as a more important conflict. So she was willing to give up some territory to Sweden if it got them out of the war so she could focus everything on the Ottomans. So going forward in the Napoleonic conflict, Sweden will have these two territories going into it. That's pretty much it so far. Russia's Cossacks have been a nightmare for the Ottomans. They're hit or attack at a 3 or less on a d6, so it's the highest hitting unit on the board. But the Ottomans just gotta try to hold on for 3 more turns, so we'll come back at the end, the spring of 1782, and see who won. See you then. Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. This is NATO in the CIC, and we're in the spring of 1792, and the war is over. And it was a close one. This and the whole thing was decided on the very last turn. Russia was leading it because they held Kiev, but then the Ottomans took western Ukraine and tied it up 1-1. But then Austria took Serbia and squeezed out the 2-1 victory for the Russian/Austrians. So it's always a good game when it comes down to last to the wire, last turn, last roll of the dice. When it comes down to that, that's always a good game. So the Ottoman Navy was victorious, however. The Russians sent their frigate down to try to open up the Lend-Lease via the sea route, and they failed. The Ottomans actually captured the Russian frigate. But it seems how that was it for the Russian Navy, and it appeared that Russia wasn't willing to spend money on building any more. The Ottomans didn't see any point in repairing it, but as you can see, quite a bit of territory changed hands. But so what does that mean going forward in the future? It means it's all about here, Galicia. It means when the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is partitioned, Russia will get Galicia instead of the Ottomans. One of the things that Russia really struggled with, and you can kind of see it, how strung out Russia's forces are, is all of Russia's factories are pretty far away from the front. It's got a minor in Moscow, minor in Smolensk, and then its majors way up here in St. Petersburg. So this is its major factory where most of its forces come from. This is the front. So Russia had to march all the way across its territory, for the most part, to get its forces to the front. So Russia kind of struggled with that, and Russia always struggles with that. Its vastness is its own enemy sometimes. But that's it. And for the next conflict is the prelude to the Napoleonic Wars as the War of the Second Coalition. So we'll be returning to Western and Central Europe. And France will be France has fallen to revolution, so it's a French Revolution going on, and France will be at war with Austria, England, and the Ottomans. This will have Napoleon's famous expedition to Egypt. So we'll clean up the board and retool and get that set up for you. So we'll see you for the War of the Second Coalition.